Okay, everyone, I am so excited today to talk about True Detective Night Country Episode 1. This is a spoiler review. It is crazy to be talking about True Detective. I feel like Season 3, when I reviewed it, was years ago. I think I still had hair when that was being reviewed, so it's crazy to be talking about this show now. I'm very excited to talk about this episode, and it's crazy a couple things about this new season because the first one they actually have a subtitle in it with Night Country. It's technically Season 4, and Jodie Foster is starring in a TV role for the first time since 1975. And it's the first time that Nick Pizzolatto, who usually is a showrunner on the show and writes most of the episodes, is not writing here. He's still an executive producer and he's not showrunning either. This is all Issa Lopez who's directing, showrunning, and writing on every episode with others sometimes, but it's mostly her. So it was interesting to see that news come out and see where this would kind of go with it. So this quote we see at the beginning of the episode, what's wild about this quote, it's actually from a fictional character, and it actually is alluding to maybe a connection we might get to season 1 with the Yellow King. The fictional character who says the quote is Hildred Castanage, and he's from a short story from 1895, The Repairer of Reputations, which is in the book The King in Yellow. These are both written by Robert W. Chambers, and it's a story about a mentally troubled man who becomes obsessed with the play in this story, The King in Yellow, and he becomes increasingly more dangerous as the story progresses, taking fiction as fact to the point of attacking other people. So this could be a hint too of what's going on in this season, and that might be the case. Especially you see how this character of Clark, how we see him behave when she says she's awake, that could be alluding to something, or someone's going so crazy and believing in fiction that they make it fact. But that important connection could be the King in Yellow, that somehow maybe the myth of the Yellow King from season 1 will relate to this in a way. Now the quote is, "For we do not know what beast the night dreams when its hours grow too long for even God to be awake." This is a direct connection to the time in Alaska and how it has this long period of time where it is just night, and that is where this show will begin. It's a very cool quote to actually start this episode, and we see it's December 17th in Alaska. It's the last sunset of the year. Now, you have this indigenous hunter who is about to shoot these deer who are then spooked when the sun goes down. It's like they sense this entity that they're alluding to that is spooking people in this town, and it also is little symbolism too of these innocent creatures like deer jumping off a cliff, and that, okay, the innocence, the peace is dying now quickly in this town. It's going to get real here. Now you cut from this to the Arctic Research Center, and there's 8 men we're going to get quick glimpses of. And the last one we meet is Raymond Clark, who we're going to learn the most of this episode. This is the one who we learn is wearing the Parker that clearly was Annie's, and it has the smiley patch on it. He is the same one shaking in this first scene saying she's awake, and then the lights go out. That's all we see here, and then these men disappear. Now that she's awake line is going to come twice later in this episode with 2 different characters, which we're going to get to. But now the episode cuts to December 20th, the 3rd day of night, and the delivery man comes to the research center. He's going to discover that something is up here, and we hear Twist and Shout from Ferris Bueller's Day Off just keeps playing over and over because they had started it when this incident happened, meaning no one else stayed in there because it's still playing. And the hallway, something runs by, and you'll also see when Detective Danvers goes back to the research center later in this episode, she hears a similar noise that creature made. It's alluding to, or it's a person, whatever it is. She heard that sound a couple of times. But he will find a tongue on the ground, and then that will cut out. So then we're going to meet Detective Navarro first, and she finds an incident at a crab center where a woman was hit by her boyfriend, and the woman working with her, where she now lives with, defended her and hit the man with a bucket. This is a huge scene, and just knowing the character of Navarro, they're introducing you and what she's about. You see how they wrote the scene really well because it's showing you she's looking for the woman's truth first, where the worker, who's a man behind her, is pleading for the guy on the ground. Like, oh, she should be arrested. He's hurt, But she wants to hear the story from the woman first. She's someone who knows women are usually put in terrible spots and not listened to, and she is a protector of women, so it's setting that up just with a scene like this. Now we first meet Liz Danvers and Hank Pryor, who are arriving to crime scene at the research center. Now Liz immediately wants this Twist and Shout clip turned off when she hears it. It's not even the visual, it's the hearing that song. That's going to come back somewhere. That's super important, those kind of character details and how serious she was about getting that song turned off immediately. And that makes me think it's alluding to that night that her daughter is talking about that she's scared to talk about with drinking and driving, which we get hints about, which I'm going to break my theories on into that. But this has to be somewhere in that night, maybe someone who died in it that is related to her. Love that song, love the Beatles, we'll see. Also in this scene, we see the feature DVD that's on the shelf of DVDs is The Thing. That's no coincidence. This should remind you the setup of the movie The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, in that there's this paranoia going on, who's this entity that is messing with them, and it's at a research center in the cold. So it's very, very similar vibe. So it's no coincidence that's the DVD that's sitting there on the shelf. Now we'll also meet in the scene Peter, who is Detective Pryor's son. And he's clearly learning more and more on the job. He's not this super experienced cop. But what I love about this premiere so far is every single character we get a little detail in their personal lives and some of the gray that is in all of them, which we're going to get into. Now, they read off all the researchers' names that were in this facility. There was 8 men. They were all men, and one was reading Blood Meridian. Now, this is a novel about teenagers' experience with the Glanton gang, who are scalp hunters who massacred indigenous Americans. So this is a very interesting book for someone in this group to be reading with what's going on. And we learn that they're living at this research center all year long, and that's where Danvers is like monks. And she wants to know what they're digging the ice up for, and Peter says, looking for the origin of life, clearly. So this is going to be important to him, what exactly they're digging in that ice. And you see, "We are all dead" is written on the whiteboard. So you're wondering who wrote that in the group. That maybe someone else was also behaving like Clark was in that moment of paranoia. Now, when we see how Detective Hank Pryor behaves, he's not the best detective. Or you can look at it as maybe he's a little fishy. It's either or. Because he's saying the ham looks fresh. He's calling off Danvers for causing a panic. Doesn't want her pushing this forward too quickly, but she already knows her way behind. She knows it's at least 48 hours with the state of the clothes they're in smelling, and that the mayo is watered out. And what's also important is when she finds the tongue and she's talking to Peter about it, Hank's not even paying attention to this. He's zoned out here. He's on his phone, texting. It's very sketchy how this whole scene plays out with him. Now, when she's looking at the tongue, she says the marks come from licking the thread, fixing the fishing nets. This is how she knows it's a native woman's tongue. What's also mysterious about Hank is that Danvers will tell Hank to hit up command and see if they have a tongueless lady in a fridge somewhere. And like I was saying, he's not paying attention. But then she tells Peter to do it. But when he sees she tells Peter to do it, he stops him and he makes the call. So very suspicious as well. We don't see his convo either after that. Now we see in the first time our glimpse of this fictional town, Ennis, Alaska. And this is where the police station is. And Danvers arrives, but Navarro is waiting at her desk. So it's the first time we're seeing them interact with each other in the show. And she's like, look, it's not her tongue. It's been 6 years, because she knows why she's there. And then she says, but it's a woman's tongue. And she's like, I don't know. So already lying to her, not giving her the full story. And we're learning that Navarro was taken off this case about this woman, Annie. And see, what's important is Navarro is bringing up to her that she never wanted to really look at her files talking about Annie's case. And when Navarro leaves, she does tell Peter to get those files on Annie. So what's interesting and what I love about what they did with Navarro and Danvers' relationship is that you see Danvers cares, but Danvers is somebody who cares and wants to do the right thing, but she does also the ignorance is bliss card, right? She's a trouble facing the truth. She has it in her whole life. It's also explained with whatever happened with this drunken driving incident we're going to learn about in her past, but the way she responds to things, where Navarro sees things as they are and hunts it down, looks for the truth in situations and isn't scared off of them as much as someone like a Danvers. Now we'll see with Danvers' personal life that she gets a call from one of her daughter Leah's classmate's mother, and she found on her daughter's phone a video of her having sex with Leah, and she's only 16 years old, so she's reprimanding Leah about this, and this is where they just avoid a drunk driver. So the point of that is to show you how that's not just a normal thing for them. That's going to have some emotional weight for both of them, especially the way they look at each other when she's arresting the drunk driver. Now, another important scene here is Navarro will meet up with Annie's brother, Ryan. Now, you could see Navarro's actively still working this case for Annie, and she's seeing if there's any connection of this research center to Annie because of this tongue. And when she asks Ryan for water, he says, water's bad, turned to junk about 3 days ago. Annie would say, I told you so. So that's important too, because it's something that Annie would have been complaining or protesting about and had a hunch about that could happen. That was some kind of truth that was probably shut down and people did not want her to say, and now it's happening. And we also learned that Ryan works at the mine, and it wasn't easy for him because his sister Annie was protesting the mines. They didn't see eye to eye on these issues, and he says they were barely speaking that last year. Now, he will ask Navarro if she believes in God, and she says yes. And then when she's saying my last tour, she doesn't finish her story, but we see that she was in the army and that her partner, it seems like in the army, her face was sliced in half. And something happened that would make her believe in God. But she says that God is alone, as we all are too. So it's kind of going back to that quote at the beginning of the episode about when the night goes dark, this, God's got to sleep in a sense. So what happens and what beasts come out, and that it's not all on God, kind of a theme there. It's on us too in moments. Now, she'll also get a call, a distress call about her sister, Jules, and she's saying someone's in the apartment. So this could be this entity. This could be the woman in the drawing that will see Peter's son, Drew, which we'll get to. But you see that Jules says to Navarro, I'm not like Mom. And she's like, you're nothing like Mom. So that's going to be important in Navarro's backstory and what happened with her mom, what her mom was like, and that her mom was someone who clearly had visions in a way, and something traumatic must happen to her, especially relating to why Navarro cares so much about protecting women. There's got to be something that happened to her mom in that relation. Now, when Peter and Liz are at the police station and they're finding out who funds the research center, we never truly hear, because at this moment, the drunk driver Stacy is screaming downstairs. So that's also going to be important, and that we just haven't heard it yet. And so I love about the writing in this episode is all these scenes matter and serve not just the plot, but character. And that's important in how Danvers reacts to Hank Pryor letting this drunk driver almost off, and she's like, no, she's going back in there until at least she's sober. And again, just another moment of Hank. He might be a red herring, but very sketchy when she asks about the Annie file. She's like, I know you have it after that flood. And he's like, oh, I don't think I do. I'll check. And he clearly wasn't going to check, and she knows this. This is why she's going to actually send Peter to get them. Now, like I was talking about with Peter, we meet his family here, his girlfriend and his son, and Darwin is drawing a scary image of a woman, and this is where the girlfriend refers it to a local legend, and you see that Peter's that he doesn't like that side of his family, right? That his grandma is being this influence to his son and says it's going to cause him nightmares. And the greatest part of him is when he's weirdly aggressive, like too aggressive to his girlfriend Kayla when she's trying to give him a hickey and he's trying to answer the phone for Danvers. It was like really, really weird. Now, the call obviously is for him to go get the files from his dad's place, and Hank is painting the living room super blue for his foreign fiance. Now, Peter is trying to fool his dad, and he's saying he's getting a picture for his son of him when he was younger, and he throws the Annie files out the window. But I do believe Hank, even though he's maybe coming off as not the best detective, unless he is actually just something's up with him and he's lying all the time and he is a good detective, I still think he definitely caught his son took something more than just this photo that he shows him. I think he knows something's up. And remember, it's going to come back because Peter says to Danvers that his dad would kill him if he knew that he did that. Now, he'll bring these files to Danvers. It's interesting, she's wearing a Viking sweatshirt. Jodie Foster in real life is a Packers fan, so I'm actually shocked she went through with actually wearing that sweater, because we know some actors, thinking of Ben Affleck, refused to wear a Yankee hat in a movie because he is a big Red Sox fan. Now, this is where Peter's kind of nudging at her like, okay, tell me the story of this Annie case, and you know more than you've let on, and that he can tell he lied to Navarro about what she actually knew and that she did look into the case, because again, like I said, she is a person who cares and is smart, but she chooses to be ignorant sometimes. But we're learning the story as she's telling Peter, and she's like, the body of Annie was found on the edge of the villages, and Navarro was the first one on the scene. And they called her Annie K. She was stabbed 32 times, and we'll see later on when Navarro's going into more detail exactly what happens, because she's giving the light version to Peter, but what really was happening too is how much they were beating her up while she was already down. It's also interesting she has the same face tattoo on her chin that Jules has, Navarro's sister. But she does tell Peter the missing tongue was never recovered. But she also brings up how she was an activist and she was driving everyone nuts, like the workers, the mine folks, and she had lots of haters, so of course she was going to have a lot of people targeting her. Now she explains why Navarro was taken off the case, and this goes back to her having a thing about women who get hurt, and she was angry, and she started bugging at the wrong people, she says. The mine people got in fights, so Hank had to take her off the case, which is also a little suspicious here about Hank adding to that. But see, Danvers was brought in to the town of Ennis, and Navarro wanted her to work on this case. And she was like, well, Ennis killed Annie. No killer was ever going to be found. So she throws things away quickly. Again, this like ignorance is bliss part of it. And she's got a little deep down guilt in there about how she probably handled all of this. And that's why she's looking more into it now, because she can tell Navarro is right in what she's saying about how this could definitely be connected to Annie and the research center. Now we get a quick scene here where Navarro goes to sleep with this man, Eddie, who loves wolves. He has wolves. He has posters of wolves. And that we learn her sister works for him. That's really all we get mostly out of this scene. There's not much else to it. So that's setting something up for that character of Eddie. Now, see, important scene here is when Leah's talking to Liz. And she's like, it's silly we don't talk about that day in relation to just driving drunk. And she says, you know, you don't really have to be my mom, Liz. I think my dad would have understood. So there's a couple theories you can have here that, remember when she found Stacy driving drunk, and then she was remembering a similar moment with the driving drunk day they're talking about where she was in jeans, that her being in jeans makes me think that she was the one driving drunk, and that possibly she killed her own child, killed her father, and then in her guilt took on Leah as her own. That's the theory I think we're kind of pointing to here, and why she'd be so against drunk driving now. And why I'm saying she had her own kid is because there's this scene after where Liz is sleeping and she hears mommy and she goes, Holden, and then she says she's awake back to her. So this is the same thing that Clark said in the first scene, she's awake. And then she has a polar bear doll missing the right eye. Now what's crazy about that is then when Navarro calls a woman to ask about Annie in connection to the station, it breaks up while she's driving in her car. And then a voice says on that radio, she's awake. So she hears it too, and then sees the polar bear with the missing eye in the road. I also thought it was interesting, the polar bear walks away from Navarro. That tells me maybe whatever that part of the entity is with the polar bear is good and sees good in Navarro. That is my opinion on that. I never think that's a coincidence. When an animal who could be dangerous sometimes turns away, you could tell he liked her. Also, what's interesting about Navarro is she sees the man from early on when she's coming out of the liquor store who hit his girlfriend at work. She overhears him saying he's going to get her back, and then Navarro pours Bailey's in his gas tank. Just a little more to learn about this character of Navarro and how far she'll go. Now, for everyone who is a true crime junkie, you gotta love scenes like this with Jodie Foster now has all the photos and articles laid out on the floor, and she's doing the true detective work, no pun intended. And now she realizes too, she's got to bring over these Annie case files while she's doing this. And she gets the big break in this case where she sees the jacket on Annie matches the jacket on Clark. Her jacket had a hole there, and it was replaced clearly with that smiley patch. So this will lead Danvers to go back to the research center. But when she enters that creepy hallway, like I was mentioning, she hears that mysterious moaning almost sound of some kind of entity or person that has to be that thing that ran by the delivery man earlier in the episode. And she's even weary here. So there's a part of her that knows something is off here, but Navarro walks out, right? So that kind of brings that down a bit. And there's a great line here I loved with the writing, which was really impressive to me, just about really summing up these two characters well, is when they're talking about cases that are open that they've had. And little line is Navarro saying, we carry them all. And Danvers says quickly, no, we don't. That just says everything about these two characters and how they look at life and view things and how they operate with the ignorance is bliss theme going on between them. And that Danvers definitely agrees with her deep down that they carry them all, and she does carry them all, but she's able to kind of like shut that off and put that wall there. And even the way she says, oh, it's just one parka, could be thousands of them. And that's when Navarro's like, right, so what are you doing here then? And she's like, just following up. So it's just, again, great lines like that and scenes like that summing up how their characters really are, and especially with each other. It's a fascinating relationship, which I love. Now, Raymond Clark, who we're learning the most about this episode, they see he's the only one with a room of his own. Now, I think that could also be because he probably was freaking out the other guys and no one wanted to share a room with him, or he was hiding something, or honestly both. And you see Navarro's like, Annie's case isn't closed, and this is where Danvers is like, let her go, let that poor girl go. And we get the heated moment between them now that really they had to get this out on each other, get the air out. And then Navarro says to her, you didn't find her, you didn't see the hate, you can see the disgust in the way they cut her, kicked her when she was down, cut out her tongue. And then she says, wouldn't happen if she was white though. And you see how Danvers reacts, and she's like, oh, please. But this is where Navarro's like, no, they would have had the whole police force out looking for her if she was white. So this is, again, a moment where they're showing the two of them how they react differently things, and that, especially for Danvers and how she reacts to her, accusing her of that. And again, the ignorance is bliss part of all of this in a scenario like that. And she says, you're not going to blame her on me, and I wasn't even there. You know who was you. It was your case all those months. You didn't close it, you. So this is where she says exactly. So it's leaning into the guilt of that truth that Navarro is feeling and why she is so hung up on this case. Now, the great cliffhanger that you always want to have with the premiere to hook people in and go, okay, I'm coming back next week, was here, where we see this character of Rose, played by Fiona Shaw, who is skinning a dead wolf in this episode, starts seeing visions of this man, Travis, who we know is dead, and she follows Travis, where he does a interesting dance that he points in the direction of her, where to go for her. And this will lead to her finding, at least we could see some of the men. It wasn't clear enough to me if she found all of them, but it seems like she found 3 of them. And they all have these like shocked looks on their faces, like they're seeing something. So really cool way to end it. And I honestly was so impressed with this episode, like really impressed. And a lot of that comes down, obviously, the acting of both Jodie Foster and Kaylee Reis, but really mostly to the writing of Issa Lopez. Really, really top-notch stuff here, and keeping the plot interesting, keeping it moving, but also serving the characters in all her lines as well, and giving all these characters little moments in their personal life, learning more and more about them. And like I said, they all seem having shades of gray, which makes it that much more interesting. I really like that. So the mystery is there as well too. So I'm giving this one a 9.5. Thoroughly impressed with it. I'm so excited about this show. It's only 6 episodes, believe it or not. So we'll see how much meat's going to be on the bone on this whole thing, but I feel like there's going to be long episodes, each of them, so maybe that's for better, that it doesn't drag out at all if it's only 6 episodes. I'm really excited, and now I'm like, okay, finally an exciting HBO weekly show we could talk about on Sunday night, so I'm really pumped. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. I read every comment. I try to respond to as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of this show. I'll be doing every single episode, and I'll see you next time.